Back to one of our top stories today, and new fallout moments ago after a top official at the EPA was caught on tape in 2010, but it just surfaced, saying something that he's now had to apologize for. Congressman Darrell Issa, who chairs the House Government Reform and House Oversight Committee, just announced that he wants to investigate the regulatory practices of the EPA. Following this, the following controversial comments from 2010 that have come to light. Now, these feature a top EPA manager. He oversees 5 states, comparing his approach to the oil and gas industry and how he regulates it under this administration to the approach used by Roman conquerors.
I was in a meeting once and I gave an analogy to my staff about my philosophy of enforcement, and I think it was probably a little crude and maybe not appropriate for the meeting, but I'll go ahead and tell you what I said. It was kind of like how the Romans used to, conquer little villages in the Mediterranean. They'd go to a little Turkish town somewhere, they'd find the first 5 guys they saw, they'd crucify them. And then, that town was really easy to manage for the next few years.
Joining me now, former Clinton campaign advisor Simon Rosenberg, who is president and founder of the progressive think tank NDN, and former Bush speechwriter Marc Theissen, who's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. So now Chairman Issa wants to investigate this. Many people are standing up and paying attention. You heard Jay Carney being asked by Ed Henry about this moments ago, who said, he said, should he be fired? And he said, look, he's apologized and he doesn't speak for the administration. Mark, should that be the end of it?
No, it shouldn't. It was an incredibly revealing moment. And quite frankly, Megyn, I'm a little bit confused, and maybe Simon can clarify something for us. We were told initially that Obama was going to be the new messiah who was going to stop the rise of the oceans, and now they're telling us that he's the new Pontius Pilate who's going to crucify American business. So they need to get their story straight. This was a hugely revealing moment, unintentionally so, because conservatives have long argued that liberalism is at its core. It's an authoritarian ideology. They want to tell people how to run their lives and run their businesses and all the rest. And it's a very rare instance where you now have an Obama administration official basically confirming it. Their view of the role of government is that government's job is to crucify American business, to treat private sector businesses like barbarians who have to be conquered and tamed and made examples of us so the rest of us will fall into line. And that's exactly how they have governed. I mean, the Obama administration has been like a horde of Roman legions coming down on the private sector. They have instituted, since Obama took office, 20,000 pages of new regulations in the Federal Register that American businesses have to comply with. They have spent 81 million hours complying with those regulations, with that paperwork, at a cost of $40 billion. That is money and time that is taken out of productive work, that costs jobs, costs businesses, and they're doing exactly what they said they were going to do. They're crucifying American business.
Simon?
That was a lot to follow up on. First of all,
take your choice.
Okay, first of all, I think this EPA official should be fired immediately.
Do you?
He's clearly not fit to be serving in the government, talking the way that he does. And I want to be clear about one thing. He was not talking about the EPA's philosophy. He was very specific. He said, my approach to regulation, which is not the approach to regulation that on the industry that this administration's taken. Look what's happened in the energy sector.
Oh, sure it is.
Well, let me finish. You got your time, Mark. Is that, we've now, gas production in the United States, natural gas production is at an all-time high. Oil production has gone up every year that Barack Obama's been president. We've seen a decrease of the imported oil in the United States as part of our overall oil strategy from 7% of the oil we use in 2008 when George Bush was president to 45% today. There's been a plummeting of use of imported oil. We've seen a doubling of the use of solar. The energy strategy this administration has used is working, and we're also seeing gas prices coming down. And so I think that this in no way reflects the overall strategy of the administration. This guy is an outlier, and he should be relieved of his duties today.
Mark, Senator Inhofe came out and said, just so our viewers understand, he said it's not just rhetoric, because the guy, when he apologized, came out and said, look, it was offensive and it was an inaccurate way to portray our efforts to address potential violations of EPA regs. But Inhofe says, no, it wasn't an inaccurate way to portray what you do. It's exactly what you do. And he gave examples in 3 specific states of the EPA going after companies with big headlines, grabbing big headlines about how awful they were in violating regulations, only to, when Congress was in recess and late Friday afternoons, then have to dial it back and admit that they were wrong, that the companies didn't do what they said. And here's Inhofe on that point.
They hope that they can admit that they were wrong quietly, but We are not going to let that happen and not let them get away with it. The American people deserve to know exactly why the EPA is pushing ahead with such intensity to capture alarmist headlines, and then when no one's looking and when their investigation shows that they are wrong, quietly back away from them.
He perceives it as harassment.
Yeah. No, he's exactly right. Look, I wish Simon was right that this guy is an outlier who doesn't represent the views of the administration, but the reality is this is exactly how the EPA has conducted itself. And, you know, Simon raises the point that oil production has gone up. That is because of advances in technology. It has nothing to do with Obama administration encouraging the production of oil and gas. And the fact is they turned down the Keystone pipeline. They've banned most of the Outer Continental Shelf for oil exploration. They've got new regulations that are basically putting hundreds of coal-fired plants out of business and making it impossible to build any more. They're waging a war on fossil fuels. And so I think the reason why this is so damaging is because most people who look at the Obama administration's energy policies realize this really is a perfect metaphor for the Obama administration's approach on energy.
He came out in Huff, Simon, and said, let me just give you an example. There's this a lumber company in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Mill Creek Lumber. The guy called me up and said, I'm getting threatened by the EPA $5,000 a day for an alleged violation that I'm not guilty of. That would put me out of business. He claims that this is one of the companies that was made an example of, and he underscores that of just how damaging this approach has been. He says these are job creators, and you can't have them being made examples of in this way, that Americans should be paying attention and should be outraged. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Megyn, just to repeat what I said earlier, I mean, natural gas production in the United States has increased dramatically under President Obama. The EPA and the Energy Department have been actually helping,
but should more be done, Simon, but should more be done to make sure that, you know, Mr. Armendariz' thoughts and philosophy is not spread among other EPA administrators?
I think, look, this guy clearly is not fit to serve in government, and he needs to be removed from his responsibilities immediately for talking the way he did, because he in no way does it reflect the overall philosophy of this administration or the EPA. How do we know that?
How do we know
that? Well, because the government has said that, and because of the actions that they have taken, because during the time that we're discussing, there's been a significant increase in production of oil and gas in the United States. There's been no curtailing of development. And all of that happened with the backdrop of the worst. I'll get to that in a second. Let me finish, Mark, come on.
I'll give you the last word, Mark.
On the backdrop of the worst oil spill in the history of the United States. And despite that, oil and gas production has increased. New regulations have been put into place to protect consumer safety in a time when these things do make messes. And I think the very modest regulations the EPA put in 2 weeks ago around fracking were modest and measured and accepted by industry just 2 weeks ago as reasonable steps taken to protect consumer safety, to allow the business to continue to grow.
Mark, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, Keystone pipeline was rejected. Outer Continental Shelf has been put off for exploration for 5 years. The advances the increases that Simon is talking about are purely a result of advances in technology that didn't exist. And the reality is Obama has waged a war on fossil fuels, and at the same time he's got this green energy initiative, which resulted in Solyndra and 71% of the green energy grants going to political cronies. And again, that's what happens with the authoritarian view of government.
In 3 years,
it goes to political cronies. So that's what we have.
Okay, got to leave it at that, guys. Good debate. Thank you both.